An excerpt from A Brush with Evil on Hags, written by Elizabeth M. Soot. It has been too long, dear reader, since we last sat together. I wish it was because I'd been traveling far and wide, working to bring you more tips and tricks on how to triumph over evil. Alas, that was not the case, for I fell prey to a green hag. Worry not, I'm alive and well, but I have spent the last 2 years in her service. One day I will share what happened in that darkened cell, but not this day. Instead, I come to you with a warning. We have discussed hags before, be they of the night, green, or sea variety, and how they are not to be trifled with. But even with all my research, I never truly understood what it meant to encounter one. Evil beings, hags rely on magic, deceit, illusion, and even blackmail to lure their victims in. I knew this. I repeated it many times to you, dear reader, but I did not realize their charm, their allure. I did not know I would come to love her, that I would yearn to please her. She strung me along, tempting me with my wildest dreams. I thought myself clever, that I would be able to outmaneuver. I once bested a glabrezu. Surely I could handle a green hag. And she let me believe it. Until she sprung her trap. Hags delight in suffering, priding themselves on creating new and inventive ways to torment those in their care. And while I have escaped, I spend every waking moment in fear that either her or one of her sisters will come for me. For a hag coven does not let even the smallest of slights go unpunished. And so, I rescind my previous guides to dealing with a hag, my suggestions for clever language and deceit. Instead, I offer these words should you ever encounter a hag. Run! And pray she does not follow. Welcome to the Atlas of the Uncanny, a collection of stories, myths, and strange creatures drawn from the edges of maps and the corners of memory. This is not a place for answers, but of echoes of creatures half remembered, histories whispered, and wonders that refuse to stay buried. And welcome to the 4th episode of the Atlas of the Uncanny. Sorry for the long wait, but sometimes life just gets in the way, and this time it was in a good way, so can't really complain. Today we are asking a question that folklore never thought to answer, because it was too busy demonstrating it. Why is it always an old woman who becomes the monster? The intro you just heard was from Baldur's Gate 3, the 2023 role playing game that broke the internet and my sleep schedule. It's based on Dungeons and Dragons, of which I'm a huge fan, and if you've played it, you know exactly which encounter made your hands sweat. If you haven't, well, as usual, finish this episode, please. Clear your calendar for about 3 weeks and get ready to enter a world of adventures and romance and hormones and everything. It's just like life, but better.
Oh, yeah.
In the game, one of the most genuinely terrifying enemies is the Green Hag. She bargains, she deceives, she knows more than she should, and she is, of course, an old woman, which raises the question, why her? Why is it mostly a her? As most things, this too starts with language. And the word hag itself has a story worth telling. Hag comes from the Old English hagtes, I think is the pronunciation, which likely meant hedge rider, a term for a supernatural figure or wise woman who could exist on the boundary between the civilized world and the wilderness. Not inside the village, not safely domestic, but on the threshold. The word appears in Middle English as a shortening of Hagtes, with similar words appearing also in Dutch as Hex and in German as Hexe, all derived from the same Proto Germanic root, which is what possibly was related to the word for hedge. So we begin with this hedge rider, a woman of the boundary, someone who knew both sides, the safe, firelit world inside the hedge, and everything that lived outside it. Hag is often paired and confused with the word crone, as though they are the same insult wearing different hats. Well, they're not quite. And crone has a different story and honestly, a worse one. It entered English around 1390 from an Anglo French insult meaning disagreeable woman, itself from an Old French word literally meaning carrion. Carrion, rotting flesh. That is what someone, at some point, decided was the correct way to refer to an older woman. Just let that sit there for a moment. I'll wait. So the Edge Rider became a witch, which became a hag, which became that word you don't say to someone's face. And somewhere in that journey, a lot of real women got very badly hurt. Here is something most people don't stop to think about. Before Christianity spent several centuries tidying up European folklore, figures like the hag were complex, dangerous, yes, but also vital. They were not just evil, they stood at the edges. They remembered what others forgot. They were knowledge itself. They keep the knowledge. The hags of Irish folklore, for example, were shown as wise, supernaturally empowered old women from ancient times, sharing a kinship with ancient fairy queens. They had names and histories and significance. Then, gradually, knowledge stopped being respected and started being dangerous. The more you know, the more dangerous you are.
Wait, who is that? Who is that? Wait, who is that?
As patriarchal Christianity spread across Europe, it had little room for such ambivalent female figures. Their complexities were cancelled, and their powerful traits were recast as purely demonic. Of course, the demon is everywhere when it's about women. And the women who embodied those traits in real life, I mean, think about the healers, the herbalists, the midwives, those women who literally help other women give birth and also that were there during death, the widows who refused to remarry, the women who lived alone at the edge of the village, and frankly just minded their own businesses, which was apparently everyone else's problem. Well, you probably know how that went. There are entire podcasts dedicated to the witch trials, and they have plenty of material if you want to listen to them. 40,000 to 60,000 executions across Europe between the 15th and the 18th centuries. It was the so called witch trials or witch hunts. They were mostly women. To be fair, there were also men, especially in Northern Europe. And the women were mostly older, and they were guilty of nothing more than existing without permission and not having a use anymore to society. So, if you've heard any of the podcasts about this, or if you read about witches, if you have any interest in this topic, you've probably heard about the Malleus Maleficarum. It was a manual written in 1486 by an inquisitor named Kramer and presented as an official church position on witches. A thing worth mentioning is that this book was actually condemned by those who study theology at the Faculty of Cologne for recommending illegal procedures and being inconsistent with Catholic doctrine, which was kind of embarrassing for Kramer, really. But as usual, where there is a crazy, there is an even crazier. And in this case, the crazier was Pope Innocent VIII. who praised Kramer for this book, and since then the book was widely read. It framed women as spiritually weaker, more easily tempted by the devil, and inherently dangerous. Like, yes, we have dangers inside of us. Older women, naturally, were considered worst of all. Women with nothing left to give, and I'm using quotes here, to society. Women outside male controlled structures like widows, healers, midwives, and unmarried elders, like we saw above. The social outsider became a theological threat. But here's where it gets like a vicious cycle, and frankly, a little uncomfortable. Did folklore create these creatures to justify the persecution? Or did the persecution reach for folklore to give itself a face? The honest answer is probably both, feeding each other across centuries. The hag gave the fear a shape. And once the fear had a shape, it was very easy to look at a real woman, like, again, a healer, a widow, just a resourceful woman who lived alone. And once you look at her, you could say, there she is. We've seen her before. We know exactly what she is and who she is. The creature made the accusation feel like recognition. And since we are talking about them, let's meet some of these creatures. First off, let's talk about the best known older woman of all, Baba Yaga. No matter where you grew up, you've probably heard of her. She lives deep in the forest in a hut that stands on chicken legs. Yep, chicken legs. Honestly, the most chaotic architecture in all of folklore, probably. And she flies through the air in a mortar wielding a pestle. Yes, she doesn't have a broom. She has a mortar, or in some cases, she is in a barrel. Her name is already a puzzle. Baba clearly means grandmother or old woman in Slavic languages, but Yaga remains mysterious. Some scholars connect it to Proto Slavic words meaning horror, anger, or even witch, while others link it to words for snake or disease. In any case, it doesn't come off really well, and the ambiguity seems entirely appropriate. What scholars generally agree on is that Baba Yaga represents an ancient figure, possibly predating the Slavic conversion to Christianity. Some researchers believe she originated as a goddess of death and regeneration, a guardian of the passage between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. Some folklorists think she was originally the spirit of a female ancestor, a dead grandmother who still shows up when you need guidance, which explain both the help and the occasional threat to cook you. You know, grandmothers love to cook. Then, with Christianity, the narrative, of course, shifted. With the rise of patriarchy and agricultural society, an older divinity was reinterpreted as an evil spirit, and Baba Yaga was demoted to being a witch. I mean, from goddess of death and regeneration to evil witch in children's bedtime warnings, which is quite a career change. The thing about Baba Yaga, though, is that she was never fully tamed by the retelling. She is still, nowadays, not clearly good or evil. She tests the hero. She rewards the brave and devours the foolish. She keeps her word, even when she'd rather not. The essence of Baba Yaga symbolizes the unpredictable and untamable nature of the female spirit, which I can attest being true. A shamanic trickster, and a boundary crosser. A reminder that freedom lies a little beyond the border of social norms. All in all, Baba Yaga is a true inspiration. After Baba Yaga, of course, the most well known hag is the Banshee. Everyone heard about the banshee because of horror movies, books, and all of this popular culture. And most people know she originated in Ireland. She's more spectral and she's grief stricken. Legend goes that if you hear the scream of the banshee, you or someone close to you will die. The word banshee in Irish means woman of the fair mound. Is traditionally described as a woman in a long, ragged dress, flowing hair, wailing, sometimes combing that hair while she cries. She announces death with her screaming, with her crying. She does not cause it though, she just announces it. In common with some other hag figures, her wailing and calling of the victim's name were a death warning. She is a messenger, not a murderer. Terrifying, we all agree, but essentially doing a public service, very unpopular public service. A very important practical note: you should never pick up a comb you find on the ground because it may belong to her, and you do not want that kind of confrontation. Not far from Ireland, from the other side of the sea, over in Leicestershire, in England, we have Black Annis, blue faced, iron clawed, cannibalistic, said to have excavated her cave with her bare hands, using only her long claw like iron nails. She has a taste for children and lambs, both innocent beings, their skins spread over branches of a giant oak after she devoured them. She was deployed very cheerfully to frighten children into good behavior. Effective? Almost certainly. Ethical? It's a question for someone else, not for us, definitely. And in all of this, how could I not mention my birth country, Italy? Italy offers something rather different, a woman called La Befana. We even have a holiday for her. She visits on the 6th of January, sliding down chimneys to fill children's stockings with sweets if they've been good, or coal if they've been naughty. So she's very much like a Santa, like a woman, older, skinnier, ragged Santa. Unlike many winter folklore figures, though, she is not enforcing behavior so much as responding to her own sorrow and longing, which makes her considerably more interesting than a simple reward and punishment machine. Her origins go back much further than Christianity. Long before Christianity arrived in Italy, ancient Romans celebrated the winter solstice with a festival honoring Strenia, goddess of purification and well being, during which elderly women were believed to fly over fields at night, bringing blessings for the coming agricultural season. Wise women, beneficial spirits, ensuring good harvests. Nothing bad here. When Christianity spread, the church did not erase these older costumes, but reshaped them. I mean, most of Christianity is reshaped on Roman and Greek myths and beliefs and rituals. So, in this case, the flying crown of agrarian folklore became linked to a woman who missed the divine invitation and spent her life making amends just because she missed an invitation. And how did this happen? Well, according to the most popular legend, the three wise men stopped at her home on the way to Bethlehem. She was too busy cleaning, so she couldn't join them. She later changed her mind, usually happens. I mean, it happens to me too. When I clean, then I get tired of cleaning or I finish cleaning, and I say, yeah, why not join the party? So she packed gifts and set off to find the Christ child and never did. She was too late. So she visits every child instead, just in case. You never know. Her broom, which we all know is associated with witchcraft because, broom equals witch, it's actually a symbol for purification. In Italian folklore, nowadays as well, sweeping away the old year makes space for renewal. The Befana, La Befana, does not destroy. She cleans. She makes room for new and better things. And yet, despite all this, the generosity, the grief, the ancient goddess roots, the name Befana nowadays as well. I mean, now it's a little bit disused, not used as much, but still it means old, ugly hag. So if you want to insult a woman, you want to call her a Befana. I mean, you don't want to call her a Befana, but you can if you're mean. Even the nice ones, even these nice hags, don't escape the label. And now for the hag we most likely met in our lives, we all know and we all don't love, even if we didn't know her name, the night hag. The night hag is in your bedroom. You wake up, you cannot move. Something is sitting on your chest. You cannot breathe properly. There is a presence in the room. Well, congratulations, you met the night hag. The old hag sits on a sleeper's chest and sends nightmares. And we all had nightmares, so we all met her. When the person woke, they would be unable to breathe or even move for a short period, could be seconds. In the old belief, the subject was considered hag ridden. The word nightmare, incidentally, comes directly from this hag. The mare was the spirit that rode you in your sleep. Not a horse, but a mare. Something considerably worse. And virtually every culture on earth has their version. In Turkey, it's Karabasan, the dark presser. In Arab culture is Jatum, literally what sits heavily on something. And for this, we have a practical advice. You can prevent meeting a Jatum just by sleeping on your right side and reciting the throne verse of the Quran. In Fiji, the experience is called Kana Tevoro, being eaten by a demon, sometimes identified as the spirit of a recently dead relative who has come back with unfinished business, which adds a whole layer to family drama. The Yoruba people of southwest Nigeria have the Ogun Oru. As usual, I'm sorry, but I'm just gonna pronounce as it's written because I don't know the exact pronunciation. So it's gonna be Ogun Oru for me. If someone knows the correct pronunciation, please tell me. A female demon who possesses body and mind during dreaming. In Mongolian, we have Kar Darak, meaning to be pressed by the black, or when the dark presses. Different languages, different demons, same sensation of something enormous and invisible, deciding your rib cage is a perfectly good place to sit. But let's dive deep into versions of these demons. And of course, the first one will be the Chinese one, because come on, China is the place I used to call home. So there will be a lot of references to China. In Chinese culture, sleep paralysis is widely known as guiya chuang, which translates literally as ghost pressing on bed. A more modern term is mengyan. The ghost in question is not always anonymous. Chinese folklore specifically associates it with the ghost of an unmarried woman, of course, pressing down on your chest. There is also a stranger regional variant. In Eastern Chinese folklore, it is thought that a mouse can steal human breath at night, sitting near the person's face, strengthened by their breath, gaining longevity and the ability to briefly become a human, which is, if anything, more unsettling than a ghost. At least a ghost is supernatural. You cannot touch it. I mean, we saw this before when we were talking about the creatures with no names in the first episode. If you didn't hear it, go listen to it. And mice are scary anyway. I mean, I have an uncontrollable phobia for mice. I'm sorry. For the second sleep hag, night hag, we are gonna go back to Italy. And specifically, we're gonna go to Sardinia, which is hardcore. Sardinia does not half-ass anything, including its sleep demon. They are called sammuttadori. Sammuttadori is the Sardinian way of explaining sleep paralysis. The name comes from the Sardinian ammuntare, which means having nightmares. The creature sits on your chest while you sleep, causing that familiar sense of oppression and suffocation. So far, so recognizable. Same thing. Every culture has it, but here is where Sardinia adds its own twist. The ammuttadori sits on the chest of the sleeping victim, suffocating them and sometimes ripping the skin with their nails. And this is already much worse than most versions. But then it is also believed in some part of the island of Sardinia Island that this demon wears 7 red caps on its head. And if the victim, while being suffocated and clothed, manages to resist the pain and steal one of the caps, they will find a hidden treasure as a reward. I mean, think about it. You are paralyzed, you cannot breathe, something is tearing at your skin, and somewhere in this experience, the correct response is apparently to steal a hat. Sardinian folklore is hardcore, is not for the faint hearted, but is surprisingly transactional. And here is another practical tip on how to protect yourself against the ammuttadori. You need to perform a series of rituals known as subrebu, sacred words and verbal charms used to keep the demon away and performed by a specialist, of course, called sa brebadora. So, if stealing the hat feels too ambitious, you can still consult a professional and avoid the sleep demon altogether. No matter where you go, they might have different names, different faces, but they give you the same suffocating weight on your chest, same inability to scream. Unfortunately, we all have to sleep. So be brave, and in case you feel suffocating, wave your arms up in a crazy way, and you'll never know. Maybe you will catch a hat and find a treasure. So here is the thing about stories told in the dark. Someone always, eventually, decides to tidy them up. By the time the Brothers Grimm were collecting and publishing fairy tales in the 19th century, the hag had been simplified almost beyond recognition. But to understand how dramatic that simplification was, it helps to remember what she was before. Before the sanitizing, before the moralizing, the hag was complex, was a woman. It was a complex woman. She was Baba Yaga, who devoured the foolish and guided the brave, and answered to no one. She was the Celtic crone goddess, who literally sculpted the landscape and tested kings. She was the night hag, present in every culture on earth, sitting at the threshold between sleep and waking. These were not minor characters, they were threshold figures. They stood at the edges of the known world and they knew things. And then came the collections, the books, the stories, the things we know. What is less commonly known about the Brothers Grimm is that their sources were not, as they claimed, ancient Germanic peasants' oral traditions. Many of their informants were educated middle class women who filtered the story through their own cultural expectations before passing them on. The Grimms then filter them again, filter them more, removing ambiguity, adding Christian moral frameworks, and constantly tidying up anything that felt uncomfortable. The hag suffered particularly badly in this process. She became the witch in Hansel and Gretel, an obstacle to be destroyed, with no history, no complexity. And then she became the evil queen in Snow White, a cautionary tale about vanity and aging, no longer a guardian or a guide, but simply reactive, angry, bitter, petty. And at the end of the story, she was never saved, always punished. I mean, think about that. The message underneath was this is what happens to women who age without diminishing. This is what women become when they are no longer useful. I mean, it's kind of funny if you think about it. You build an entire warning system around this, and every woman ages. I mean, every person ages and becomes old. And somehow, across every culture, every century, every attempt to flatten and domesticate and to destroy the woman, the old woman, she keeps coming back, almost like the power was never the problem. The fear of the power she owned was the problem. Finally, and slowly, very, very slowly, something started to shift. In the 20th and 21st centuries, feminist scholars began looking more carefully at the language. It's always about the language, so be careful how you talk and try to think before talking. So, anyway, scholars become more careful about how they used to describe older women. They found that words like hag, crone, and witch had been deliberately weaponized. They have been used to punish female independence, wisdom, and autonomy. And having found that, they decided to do something about it. Many women began reclaiming these words as a positive identity, an embrace of age, wisdom, and independence from patriarchal beauty standards, an act of defiance and a celebration of a powerful, authentic self that is no longer afraid of being judged. Neo pagan and Wiccan tradition revived the triple goddess archetype maiden, mother, and crone, in which the crone is not the end of the story, but the fulfillment of it. In Jungian psychology, the crone symbolizes the wise old woman, embodying wisdom and a refuge from the overly rational world. In 2011, Jane Fonda, the best, I love Jane Fonda, so I had to talk about her. Jane Fonda gave a TED talk that reframed the entire conversation. She argued that the last 3 decades of her life, what she called the third act, are not a decline, but a developmental stage with its own meaning, its own significance. She challenged the old metaphor of aging as an arch. You peak, you are born, then you grow up, you peak at midlife, and then it's all downhill from there. It's decline into decrepitude. She actually proposed a staircase instead, the upward ascension of the human spirit into wisdom, wholeness, and authenticity. Age is not a pathology, but has potential. A woman at the end of her social usefulness, Fonda suggested, is not diminished. She is finally fully herself. And if you've been paying attention, this is exactly what the hag always was. Back to the games. There is Dungeons and Dragons, where this episode actually began. In D&D are one of the most formidable, most written about, most feared creature in the entire game. Players don't just dismiss or fight hags. They have to prepare, and most of the time they still fail, even preparing extensively. But here is a detail that tends to get overlooked. Hags in D&D are not only enemies. They are frequently the most important NPCs in an entire campaign. You don't need to fight them all the time. You can bargain with them. And most of them hold crucial information, broker impossible deals, and offer help that no one else can provide. Of course, there is always a price. They are, in other words, exactly what the original folklore always said that they were. Dangerous? Yes, but also essential. The ones you seek out when there is no one else left to ask. There is something deeply, deeply fitting about that. Every village had a story about a hag who was driven away, burned, drowned, flattened into a fairy tale and shelved. And every village was wrong, because hags don't disappear. They wait at the threshold between the world you know and the one you're pretending doesn't exist. The hag was never the monster at the end of the story. She was the gatekeeper at the beginning of the real one. Will you be polite Will you do the work? Or will you be the one who gets eaten? Because hags keep their word. They always have. So be respectful, seek for advice, be kind, and you will gain great rewards from them. And so we close today's page of the Atlas of the Uncanny. But remember, stories like this don't end when the telling stops. They linger, they follow, they wait to be recognized. If you enjoy this journey, consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing the show with a fellow wanderer of this strange. Until next time, mind the shadows, question the familiar, and never assume you know the whole map, because the uncanny is never far